all these people here that they want to do useful things. But think about, let's take an example of SpaceX. Okay? This is the area, traditionally, we would think this is exclusive for government to do it.
Right.
It's very high hurdle from technological point of view, from financial point of view, from regulation point of view. Many people, I guess, they want to get into this area, but they feel just impossible. But what made you think you could do it? And you started this in 2001, right?
2002.
2002.
But yeah, I can tell you the origin of SpaceX was really not from the standpoint of trying to create a company. In 2001, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was just wondering why we had not gone to Mars. Because if we had gone to the moon in 1969, then surely by now we should be very close to getting to Mars.
Okay, that's your original question.
Yeah.
Why now we get into Mars?
Yes. So I thought, well, I'll go on the NASA website to find out when we're going to Mars.
Okay.
And I went on the website and I couldn't find it. And then I learned that actually that had now been taken off of the NASA goals at that time. So I thought what I would do is try to do a philanthropic mission to send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars, because the public responds to precedents and superlatives, and this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars as far as we know, and you have this great shot of green plants on a red background. And I thought that this would perhaps get the public excited enough to increase NASA's budget so that we could kind of resume the dream of Apollo. That was actually the origin. And I went to Russia 3 times to try to buy some used ICBMs to send the mission to Mars, and I did negotiate a deal, but I came to the conclusion that I was actually my premise was incorrect. I actually thought that the reason that we had not gone to Mars was because of a lack of will, but in fact, I think the will is there, but then people must believe that there's a way. If the people think that there's no chance of it being successful, then they will give up. So I decided that I had to try to start a company to reduce the cost of access to space, to improve rocket technology, because it had been essentially in stasis since the 60s. There's no fundamental improvement that's occurred. In fact, it's argue it's gotten worse on a cost per unit mass to orbit basis. So that was the basis for starting SpaceX. But at the beginning of SpaceX, I thought maybe there was a 10% chance of success.
10% chance?
Maybe, at most, yeah.
So you took the risk?
Yeah.
10%.
I mean, it seemed like if there was not something, if something wasn't done to improve the rocket technology, then we would never get there.
So Russian did not sell the rocket to you, or you thought it's too expensive, or so you want to develop your own?
Well, they actually, I did come to terms with the Russians, but then the only reason that the rockets were lower cost was because of arms reduction talks, so that they were essentially scrap rockets. So even if one could use those rockets, but once you ran out of the scrapped rockets because of arms reduction talks, then you'd be back up at the high prices again. Mm-hmm. So it was at most a short-term possibility. It would not result in a long-term benefit. It would certainly not result in the establishment of a self-sustaining city on Mars, which is really I think the goal that we should have in the space program.
Okay, now you have the will. Now you did some initial work. You contacted Russians, and you thought there's no progress made in the last few decades, so there's a possibility. But then, rocket science is very hard science. So you are not only a chief executive officer, but also chief technology officer. So your college degree is from business and physics. You only spent 3 days in a PhD program. So my guess is that, I'm pretty sure you're self-taught. You learned all these hard science engineering, computer programming, physics, and all others by yourself, engineering. How did you do that? tell us, the student, that you can do that without going through the formal programs, basically.
Oh, sure, you can learn much faster than the formal programs.
You can learn faster than formal
faster.
programs.
Much
Tell
faster.
us, share some secrets with us. How
Just
can
read
you do
lots
that?
of books.
Huh? Read a lot of books.
Read a lot of books and talk to a lot of people.
You can become rocket scientist by reading books without...
Well, and experimenting, of course. I mean, experiments and books. You need to, because sometimes the things in the books are not correct.
Okay.
But that's basically how it works. I mean, you can learn things very quickly if you just read the books. I mean, information is all there.
You just pick up the books, you learn and become an expert in this hard science engineering area. You could do that.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding like a robot, your data rate in reading books is much faster than in a lecture. You can read information far, far faster than you can hear it. So then it's much faster to read.
Well, I'm a little bit worried we'll be out of a job now if that's the case. But Professor Zhu, that we teach many physics courses here, right, for physics majors. You probably have some questions here that about what courses there.
Yeah, I think junior students can self-study physics. But anyway, the physics is based on experiments, and in particular for the engineering, hard technology is also should to do some experiments, even to do some machine in the factory. How can you get such a real experience from self-study? And I have another question about what kind of physics course do you like most? Which physics course do you think most helpful for your company, for your creative thinking, for your so wonderful companies?
Sure. Actually, the fundamentals of physics that's what's most helpful. The very framework of how to think about physics is by far the most helpful. And to sort of understand how did the first scientists learn anything, and how did they change the way that they learned things? How did they change their framework of analysis over time as they learned that one mode was better than another? This is extremely helpful to know. So honestly, it's like Physics 101 is like if people really pay attention to Physics 101, that's the most valuable. And then, I thought quantum mechanics was really interesting too. It's amazing that quantum mechanics is true. It's still hard to believe, really.
So I'm thinking that to put quantum mechanics as a required course for School of Economics and Management students in the future. So
it's a hard one, I have to tell you.
It's a hard one?
Oh, yeah.
Which part is hard? Is mathematics part or principles part? Or which part is hard for you quantum mechanics? It's counterintuitive.
It's extremely counterintuitive. So that you can't just use the way that you normally would think about the way that reality works, which you can in many other areas. So because you just don't have, your intuition is not a good guide, that makes quantum mechanics quite difficult. It also combines quite a lot of advanced math and statistics at the same time. So if you're very good at statistics, then quantum mechanics would really help. Yeah.
Okay, I did statistics.
Yeah.
So
I think statistics is quite hard too.
You like statistics?
Absolutely, yeah. Statistics is very interesting. Very
interesting.
I think everyone should learn statistics too.
Everyone should learn.
Yeah, very important. Because otherwise you can get tricked too easily by these things. It's, as you know, there's that famous saying, I'm not sure who it was, maybe Churchill or somebody said, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics.
That's right. There are 3 types of lies.
Yeah.
Did Churchill say this?
I think it was, maybe, I'm certain.
Huh?
Disraeli
said that.
Disraeli, okay.
Yeah, I know that.
It was some British guy.
Yeah. Very good. So now, so it's been 13 years since you started SpaceX. I know your aspiration is to send human to Mars, and with reusable rockets, reduce the cost by a factor of 10.
I think ultimately a factor of 100.
Ultimately, a factor of 100. Okay. Now, I remember you said in 2011 that at the time you said in 10 to 20 years you could put man or human on Mars. Now we are 2015, so that will actually happen, if your prediction is correct, will be 2020 or 2030. It's not that far away from now. Are you still optimistic?
I think about 10 years.
In 10 years?
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly, by you?
Yeah, that's certainly, yeah. Well, I mean, there'll be a lot others, not just me, but we have a very talented team at the company, so, there's 5,000 people at SpaceX, so.
Yeah. It won't be easy, right, reusable rockets, because NASA stopped Space Shuttle.
True.
It's a very expensive thing, so I'm not an expert on that, but I guess it's not that easy. So why you are so confident that you could do this?
Well, I mean, at this point, I feel quite confident of at least achieving boost stage reusability, because we've been able to land the boost stage twice in the ocean, and we've been able to at least hit the ship twice. On the second time, it took several seconds for the rocket to explode. So we're making progress. I think I'm highly optimistic that in the next 12 months or so that we will be able to land the boost stage safely and refly it. I mean, that one is, I think, highly likely.
Highly likely.
90% plus.
Okay. What's the probability in 10 years that we'll see a person on Mars? What's the probability?
Well, I'd give the 10 years, I'd make that the sort of 50% likely.
50%.
It sort of depends on what happens with the world, and but if one were to extrapolate current trends for SpaceX, I think 2025 is around approximately correct.
2025.
Yeah, approximately.
10 years from now, so that's.
Yeah, approximately. So, but I think the fact that reusability is important. This is an example of where first principles analysis makes sense, because if you were to look at, say, by analogy and say, well, let's look at prior efforts to achieve reusability, such as the space shuttle,
right,
or the Russian Buran program,
right,
and say, well, those attempts at reusability did not result in any improvement in the cost of spaceflight. In fact, they increased the cost of spaceflight. So the shuttle on a shuttle budget was about $4 billion a year, and there were typically 4 flights per year. So obviously the cost was roughly $1 billion a year.
Right.
And this was much more than an expendable rocket of equivalent payload capability. So then people would look at this and say, well, based on that, it would appear that reusability increases the cost; it does not decrease it. However, but this is not true if you look at it from a first principle standpoint, because if you look at, say, what is the cost of the propellant used if you use a low-cost propellant such as refined jet fuel, and in the case of our rocket, the propellant cost is approximately $300,000 per flight, but the rocket costs $60 million. So that's a pretty huge, difference. You've got the cost of propellant essentially 0.5% of the cost of the rocket. It's comparable to that of a large jet, essentially. And so obviously, if you can achieve reusability, you can start to approach the cost per flight. The cost per flight would asymptotically approach the cost of propellant. You're factoring in maintenance and other issues. And so if something similar to aircraft occurred with rockets, then you might have the cost of maintenance of both be roughly equivalent to the cost of fuel as it is with airlines, which would mean, say a $600,000 cost per flight over time, which would therefore be a 2 order of magnitude reduction.
So this is really a good example to show that I think in terms of first principles, radically different from think using analogy, right?
Right.
Using analogy, you would not find anything possible, but from the first principle.
Absolutely, and the same can be said of even building the rocket in a reusable building a rocket whether expendable or reusable, to say what should a rocket cost. One could look at what rockets have cost historically and say, well, that's what rockets will cost. Or you could say, what are the material constituents of the rocket? If you were to say, what is the weight of aluminum, titanium, Inconel, carbon fiber, and other elements, and if you had them sort of arranged in a pile in raw materials in the room and had a magic wand and could rearrange the elements into the shape that you want, then that would describe the minimum possible cost of any given physical object. And so then the trick is how you get them in the shape effectively. And if you do that, you can see that the actual cost of the raw materials in a rocket, again, expendable or reusable, is quite small. It's only a few % of the price. So then the trick is, how do you rearrange those raw materials into the shape you want efficiently?
Well, the lesson is, again, go back to the first principle.
Right.
Everything goes back to the fundamental assumptions. I know that your dream, your aspiration is to send human to Mars, but your dream is to build a city on Mars. Is that true?
Well, if you think of it sort of broadly, the history of human civilization will fundamentally bifurcate along two directions. Either we will become a multi-planet civilization, be out there exploring the stars, or we will be a one-planet civilization until some eventual extinction event, whether self-inflicted or natural. And I think the sort of former is the better way to go. And in order for that to be the case, we have to establish a self-sustaining civilization on some planet. Mars is really the only realistic possibility. And so I think we should try to do that. And this is the first time in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth that it's been possible for some life form to extend life as we know it beyond Earth. That window may be open for a long time, or it may be open for a short time. The prudent thing would be to assume that it's open for a short time and take action while we can.
Very good. So that's really your dream.
Yeah, I mean, I think
One of
that's
dreams.
in the sort of context of existential threat minimization. I think it is something we should aspire to.
From the first principle of physics, you think that's also possible?
Yeah, absolutely.